Again, I'm Andrew King, Editor-in-Chief of Canadian Musician. Thank you for joining us for how to write and distribute an effective press release. Joining me to co-present this one, as I mentioned, Cristina Fernandes, co-founder and publicist with Listen Harder Music Publicity, Toronto-based firm, represent a slew of well-known Canadian and international acts, City and Colour, Barenaked Ladies, Alice in Chains, Jimmy Eat World, a whole bunch of them. I'm privileged to get to work with her in a professional capacity and also to call her a good friend. And of course, I'm Andrew. We bring you Canadian Musician and a lot of our peripheral properties like this series of webinars. Cristina, thank you so much for joining us and waiting patiently in the wings. Looking forward to getting going here. How are you feeling?
Thanks, Andrew. I'm feeling good. I'm ready.
So a quick overview, and then we'll hand it over to Cristina. But what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to talk about press release basics. Try not to make it too elementary for you, but just give you the quick kind of rundown of what a press release is, and more specifically, what it's for, the different types of events or initiatives that you might consider sending out a press release for, where they go, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how they come together. Whether or not, depending on what stage you are in your career, it may be you and or a bandmate that's writing your press releases and taking a DIY approach to it. But even if you get to the stage where you're working with a well-known publicist like Cristina, just having this frame of reference, I think, will be very helpful to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and able to work in tandem with your publicist to maximize your effectiveness. And then we'll get into the part that Cristina really shines at, and probably the part that's going to be most helpful for you, distributing and servicing that release, where it goes, how to follow up effectively. Let's get to it. So here we go with some of the basics. You can follow along with our presentation here, and I'll hand it over to Cristina to walk us through a few of these points.
Thanks, Andrew. So basics are very important. So I want to just lay out exactly like you have in the slide. What is a press release? What is it for? Where is it sent? So simply put, a press release is a document written in third person that reads like a news story. So PRs are sent, or as we say, serviced to media. And I'll give you guys some examples, but in general, the purpose of a press release is to relay relevant information to media or make an announcement or an official statement. Now, it'll vary depending on the industry, but seeing as this is a Canadian musician webinar, I'm obviously covering music business related PRs. Now, some examples are album, single, video release, or a tour announcement, or just a show or event announcement. Sometimes it could be a unique initiative. Perhaps you're involved with a particular cause or charity or a brand. And if you're a big enough artist, you may send out a PR to announce a member is leaving or you have a new member. Whatever it is, you definitely want to think about whether what you want to announce is important enough to warrant a press release. So as for who to send a press release to, that really depends on what you're announcing and whether that news is of interest nationally or regionally. In general, we target music and entertainment news-related contacts and outlets. So blogs, mainstream press like daily newspapers, campus radio, it runs a gamut. Now, if an artist is announcing tour dates, we'll CC our contacts in each tour market. Makes sense, right? You're playing in Calgary, so we'll hit up any relevant Calgary media. If you're holding an event in Toronto and only Toronto, we're not sending that PR to our Nova Scotia media list. You just have to use some common sense here, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay. I guess in that regard too, and maybe I can weigh in a bit here, but how are releases used by various recipients? We were talking earlier that the way it's written is from a third party perspective, like it's a newspaper article, because in a lot of places, vlogs, blogs, etc., zines, if such things exist anymore. But then it might just be taken directly and kind of posted as breaking news without much thought, but pretty close to how it appears in the release itself. Whereas in other cases, I was saying like Canadian Musician, we're not really in the business of publishing breaking news per se, but rather might use releases just to keep abreast of, say, what an artist is up to what they've got coming up in the foreseeable future, and then using that to make our editorial decisions. Are there other uses for these, or places that they go maybe beyond the basics that you just outlined?
Well, I guess you could use that information when you're on social media. I mean, we send when we send out a PR, we have a wide reach nationally.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends, Andrew. I mean, there's magazines like Exclaim that will take our press release and say, oh, hey, City and Colors released a new video. They'll put together a little blurb about it. They'll include the link. But then there's other blogs, and considering the dwindling music journalists in Canada,
Right.
they don't have the time, and it's no disrespect. They will just post the press release verbatim, which makes it all the more important to ensure your message is really clear and you've written a good story for them to do that.
Right.
So I could get into writing a good press release and what you need to include in it. And
let's do just that.
So I can't stress enough how important it is to include all key information in the first paragraph or two, especially since the media person getting the PR may not read beyond the headline and that first paragraph. It's no exaggeration. These guys are getting dozens of press releases and pitches each day. You can't take it personally. You just have to keep that in mind. Now, the first paragraph should really describe what's written in your headline and your subheadline. So here's an example of a headline I have for a PR going out tomorrow, loosely. Hawksley Workman premieres video for new single Around Here on Indie 88. And then, of course, there's a link to watch the video, and a subheadline kicks off Canadian tour on November 1st because he is heading out on a big Canadian run. So if you're sending out an album announcement, include the album title, the release date, label info, any links to any supporting assets like videos, singles. I mean, sometimes you don't have the exact album title or release date, so you just work around it with more vague language, like album to come out fall 2020 or something like that. That's perfectly okay. Now, I reached out to a couple of longtime prominent journalists, Andrew, since they're the ones getting bombarded like you with press releases each day. And I asked them what sets a good PR apart and what is their biggest pet peeve. And one said exactly what I just said. Put pertinent info in the first paragraph or two. Include a short description of who you are, musical style. Include any info about when an album or track is coming out or any upcoming gigs. And a different journalist wrote me, I get around 75 pitches a day. So imagine that. You're one of 75 emails that he is getting on a daily basis. And he says, so just proudly announcing a single or album isn't going to cut it. I find that music publicists don't often see the story behind their artist, even if that's not the story that's ultimately written by the journalist. It's helpful to have a few bullet points on why I should care about this artist that I've never heard of, and very rarely should those points be about how many followers they have on Instagram or their stream count, unless it's something noteworthy. Now, to that point, I often see bands say things in their bio, and we do use biographical info to build press releases. They'll say stuff like chosen to perform during Canadian Music Week. And that's just not something that's really newsworthy considering the number of bands that perform at CMW. So you just kind of got to keep that in mind. So you have an eye-catching headline and you have all the pertinent info in the first couple of paragraphs, and you've caught the media person's interest. So now think about the rest of the press release like you're helping them write a story. That's really the best advice I can give you. The next paragraph should really weave an interesting narrative, like expand on career highlights, or if you don't have any huge career highlights, biographical info that could be of interest, things that stand out about you and your art and what sets you apart. Just keep it succinct. No one's going to read a 3-page press release, especially if you're not well known. And honestly, no one cares about what you're saying as much as you do. So just keep that in mind. It's great to include quotes from the artist, whether it's the inspiration behind a song or a release. A personal anecdote that relates to the music is always really great. And then I like to end a PR with something about what an artist just did and what's coming up. It kind of sums up a PR nicely. So this is a good spot to say something like, Jane's Party recently wrapped up an extensive tour across Europe and will be heading to the studio to work on their next full-length album. And that would be the end of the PR. And then a link to a good color press photo. And I say color because we get many artsy, really cool photos from bands, black and white pictures that are amazing. But the best chances that you have of getting your photo published is if you have good artwork that's not fuzzy or too artsy or too out of focus, or not out of focus at all, honestly, and make sure you have a color option. Honestly, that just trust me on this. And then list your tour dates if you have any. Make sure to include your social links, any contact info, and boom, that's pretty much your PR. But your subject line is really important too. And I always preface when I'm sending out a PR in the subject line, PR colon. That's just us. That's how we do stuff. It doesn't mean that other friend publicists do the same thing, but I want to make sure people know that it is a press release. And also, keep in mind, writing award-winning Canadian songstress Anjuli releases a single is much more effective than saying Anjuli releases a single. So just keep that in mind when you're coming up with subject titles, because that's the first thing you're going to do to get someone's attention, right?
Bingo. Okay, I've got a few questions that are seeping in. If anyone at any point you've got a question, type it in. It'll come straight to me, and we will put it in front of Cristina at the right time. There's something though I wanted to jump on what you just mentioned. Oh yeah, well, about I mean, obviously there's a difference. The fact that we're giving this presentation and the title obviously suggests that this is for folks in one of the earlier rungs of their career.
Right.
Which is why, coming out swinging and trying to hook someone with a great story is critical, because in the vast majority of cases here, these people may not be familiar with you or your work. And I just wanted to draw the distinction there that, if you're looking for examples of press releases, Cristina just read one from Hawksley Workman, a household name in Canada. I mean, she also works with Barenaked Ladies, City and Color, in which case it may not be as crucial to have that introductory info, because we can kind of work with the assumption. Anyway, the reason I bring this up, and Cristina, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but when we're going to talk about distributing the release in a moment here, I mean, if you're an artist based in, say, Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and organizing maybe a charity or a benefit of some kind, I guess you got to consider your audience and how you're framing the release, in that if that's just going out to the local, your media contacts in Moose Jaw, it's an event for a Moose Jaw based charity, blah, blah. There's a good chance that folks there are already familiar with who you are. And thus you can, just use that info, what the other people, your recipients know about you, can just help you craft that message to make it as relevant and to hit home as hard as possible. Anyhow, wanted to throw that in here. Yes, more questions coming in, which we will get to in a second. And one more for you, Cristina, that I thought of there. So you're working with Hawksley Workman as a client. I mean, obviously,
love him. He's such a lovely human.
I love him too, actually. And I might as well throw a self-plug that the bio that you're manipulating for that PR may very well have come from this computer.
You got to start with a good bio, Andrew. That makes a good press release.
You can check out our bio writing session at nwcwebinars.com. I guess the other one is, obviously, if there's a lot newsworthy going on, especially with an artist like Hawksley or City and Color, people are hungry for that info. There's a big audience for it. Is there a line like how many releases you might send out about a given artist within a given time frame? Is there a such thing as oversaturation?
I would say the simple answer to that would be yes. But if you have stuff that's relevant, information that you need to get out there, you kind of can't get away from it. Now that you bring it up, because I wasn't going to talk about this, but it's perfect time to talk about it. Sending out press releases, outside of writing them and writing a good one, we like to take a three-pronged approach, so to speak, especially with unknown artists, because we find it takes more than one time hearing your name before these guys are going to pay attention. Right. So we actually, when we start working with a band, because our Our motto is, as far as taking on clients, does the music resonate? Are they good people? Do they have a good team? I mean, so we don't just work with big artists. There's a lot of smaller bands that we really love their vibe and we love their sound, and we start working with them. And of course, that's where the challenge begins, because we have to sort of help build that story and interest in them. But typically what we say to a new band is, we'll send out the first press release that has, announcing that you have a new single, etc. And then maybe 3 weeks later, we have a second one coming out that's announcing tour dates. So sometimes it's part of the strategy to sit and speak to that band and say, what kind of assets do you have? Do you have videos? Do you have, how many singles do you have ready? Is the EP ready to go? Do you have a release date? All of those things kind of play into it, and then you make decisions as to when you should be releasing those press releases. You don't want to send one every second day, that's for sure, but 2 or 3 weeks space apart, if you have 2 or 3 big announcements. But if it's a bigger artist, I mean, they already have a schedule, a marketing schedule, a release schedule. So you're basically just following that schedule. There's a new Dallas single that's going to premiere on Friday. Cool. There's a PR going out on Friday because that's when the single's premiering. So I'd say that it really depends on the artist, and it depends on how interesting the news is. And sometimes if you just have one little thing to announce, I wouldn't suggest sending out a press release. Like if you have a tour and then you add a date, don't send out a press release just for that reason. Send something to that market. Let's say it's Vancouver, and just send the press release to Vancouver media and say, we've added a Vancouver date. Here's the press release, kind of thing. So that's how I would approach it.
Oh, bang on. We had a great question come in saying it'd be great to see the release that we're talking about, Hawksley's. I did think of this ahead of time, but I didn't want to, I guess, pigeonhole us with a certain caliber of artist or certain type of release, since we're casting a wide net here. But on that note, we're going to follow up with everyone that's registered tomorrow with the link to the recording. And I'll talk with Cristina about getting a good example of just a well-written kind of quote unquote general type release that a lot of artists would send out, and we can send you that example.
Yeah, Andrew, we also on listenharder.com, on the top left, we will upload a lot of the PRs we do, so that you could see sort of the last 5. I mean, we're updating our website, so I don't know if they're current beyond July there right now, but at least you can see a few examples. But yeah, happy to provide whatever you need.
Oh, that's even better. Then we're streaming people your way to get a better sense of what you do. There you go. Head to Listen Harder, just listenharder.com.
Yep.
Bingo, listenharder.com. You can see some examples. And yeah, other publicists do that too. I think Listen Harder give you a great example, especially what we're talking about here. But there you go, Deborah. That's a very easy way to do it. You can even go check them out right now. Okay. Here's one. I guess we'll have to set a more general scene here. But someone asked what it costs for a quality press release for a single. And if we can kind of just really generally touch on some of these things, like if you've hired a publicist, in a lot of cases, it's going to be the publicist that's generating that release for you. So that cost might be tucked into a wider campaign. If you're looking to do something a la carte, whether it's you want someone to write the content and then you're going to service it, or what about the inverse, Cristina? Has anyone ever come to you with copy and just asked to take advantage of your mailing list? Or like, is that a common option out there?
No, not very common at all. And we wouldn't just, I think Listen Harder can be a little more unique than other PR companies because we say no to a lot of things. We turn down stuff, and we don't send out press releases with our names attached to them unless it's something that we can get behind. So if you're reaching out and saying, hey, I'd like you to send out this press release on my behalf, and I'm not into what you're doing, then the answer would be, I'm not sending out your press release. I hope that doesn't sound harsh, but I'd like to think that a lot of people seem to really appreciate the fact that, that is really important to us, because how am I supposed to promote something to a media guy if I don't believe in it or if I can't get behind it? So that's our motto specifically. And getting involved in cost, I think I really feel weird about that because everyone has a different, I don't want to say an amount and then someone else is like, oh, we charge way more than that, or we charge, I mean, it really, really depends on who you're sending it to. And I mean, if Canada Newswire will charge a couple $1,000s at least to send out a press release. So writing a press release and sending it out really depends on who you're working with. But yeah, I mean, I can answer that question for anyone specifically that might want a specific answer on it outside of doing the webinar. But yeah, I just don't want to paint anyone into a corner. I mean, you are looking at a few $100s at least, so we could start there. I think that would be a fair assumption. And some might be more and some might be less. But if you're creating the content, as you know, Andrew, that takes a lot of time. If someone just hands off something to you that's almost pretty much done, then that's different. That could be less money. So it really depends.
Okay, there you go. And Pat, thank you too. I was gonna mention, or I guess we can save it for distributing. But you touched on it there, Canadian MediaWire, Canadian Newswire. Yeah, there are services that have kind of built-in distribution that'll go out to a wide swath of outlets across the country, and you can kind of micro-target that and send your release out that way. We've actually used that service before, and it's been effective. We've also been on the receiving end of releases sent that way, and it hasn't. So yeah, I think a lot of people have different experiences with a service like that, and I really am not comfortable endorsing or otherwise slagging them. But yeah, a little bit of poking around to check out your options and weighing costs and whatnot, I think will help. Yeah.
Yeah, and in truth, a lot of or a company like that isn't necessarily going to know who the best music writer is for outlets that are more likely to write about your band or you as an artist.
Right.
They're great. They're great for reaching a lot of mainstream stuff. If you want to reach Toronto Star and Vancouver Sun, they're great. But if you want to reach, pure grain audio, I doubt they're on their radar necessarily, but that's definitely someone you'd want to serve as a press release to. So, but we can get there. We can talk about distributing and servicing and all that stuff if you want to go right there.
Yeah, we're there. I was just making sure I didn't leave anyone's question out. Yeah, there's one. What outlets do you target your press releases towards? What a better time to move into distributing and servicing a release. Got a few other cues here that we will save for the session at the end. So yeah, here we are. We're jumping into the second half here. You've got your news release. You know how it's to be written. You know what you want to focus on. And now we got to get it out to people and try and make an impact, make a big splash with this news to the relevant media. And again, the relevant media is going to depend on geography, going to depend on the type of news you're sharing. But here we go. I feel really privileged that we have your expertise here because, folks would hire a company like Listen Harder to take advantage of their network of contacts. And yet here's Cristina being very generous with her time and knowledge, helping you when you're at that early stage, kind of put together a list of your own contacts and outlets that are relevant to you, your band, your music as you get going. So yeah, can you fill us in a bit on just some of the basics of starting and growing a mailing list? And by that, I don't mean your fan mailing list, which is absolutely crucial, but in this case, your media outlet mailing list and who can be included there.
So I've been working on our list for over 20 years. So let's just start there. So before we get into the distributing and all that stuff, let's talk about that for a moment. So a lot of contact information is posted online. So a website is really a good place to start. Exclaim, for instance, lists all of the various editors for different genres and sections of their magazine, which is so great. So you don't have any excuse to be sending a press release that for a hip hop related artist to the wrong editor. Everything's listed there for you. Now, it can often be a challenge to find a specific contact for a media person, especially if you're trying to chase people in the States for, like Consequence of Sound or those kind of outlets like Pitchfork. Sometimes we try phoning people, or we use a different email address to try to inquire. And we've had to do this more and more, unfortunately, because a lot of music journalists have been laid off, especially at newspapers in the last couple of years. So,
Right.
I mean, you have to be patient. It takes time to build a robust list, and more importantly, the relationships, which, are crucial if you want someone to actually open your email and read your email. But there are a lot of services that sell directories. We often find them to not be the most reliable or current, but it really is a good place to start. And I mean, if you love music, you follow a lot of music media online, you already kind of know where to start looking. So that's where I would start. Where do you hang out when you like to read about new artists? And that's really the best advice I can give.
Right on. Where are we going here? I had one. Oh, okay. We'll get to that in the last Q&A. On that note of like putting the call in some cases to find out where it should be going, is it fair to say that's another one where you're going to need to use your common sense? Like if there's a certain outlet that's reputable, like, that what you've got is relevant to that outlet, and it might be worth the extra digging to try and find to get it in that person's hands. I guess the question is, like, how far should someone be willing to go to try and chase down some of these contacts? And is there ever a case where maybe they're hard to find because they might not want to be pitched to?
Absolutely. That's true. A lot of editors for higher profile or, so-called uber cool outlets don't necessarily want to get email from everyone who just started a band. So yeah, that's why I say it takes time and you have to get crafty. If you're friends with other bands or other artists, sometimes asking them, sometimes they're working with people at that, and they'll, give you the contact name or the contact person. I never have a problem giving out a contact email because I just feel like you're going to find it anyway. So what's the big deal? Um, and also it's relationships for me that really make the difference. So yeah,
Yeah.
you just have to do the best digging you can and start there. But the thing is, if you're creating some buzz, after a while, they're going to find you. You're going to get random email saying, "Hey, band, we saw your stuff, or we saw you on Spotify or whatever, and we like your stuff, and we see that you're coming through town." I mean, sometimes that happens too.
Oh.
So
To complement that point too, we often say internally, my team and I, and we're part of this too, but like the media, we're all kind of copycats. There are some great tastemakers out there. But as Cristina says, like she mentioned Pure Grain Audio before, shout out to Chris Gonda, puregrainaudio.com. If you're in the heavy aggressive music scene, like that is a great kind of go-to outlet to make a splash, target very loyal readership in that world. And it's the kind of thing where once you start gaining traction, if
yes.
you're going after the right outlets and in the right space, and what you're sending out is actually A, newsworthy, and B, you're good at making music, like Cristina says there, it kind of becomes a groundswell. It gets easier. Getting those first few placements are going to be the toughest, and then things kind of start to fall into place there.
Mhm.
Because especially in this day and age with so much music out there, not a lot of people want to take chances on covering unsigned acts. But it's like once you kind of hear the same artist name a couple times, or people start come knocking at your door and you recognize that band or brand, doors start opening a lot more easily, which, yeah, as she was saying, just be prepared to put in a bit more work at the beginning, because you got to hustle.
Yeah, and also use social media to your advantage. If you think you sound a lot like a band that a music critic you really like and follow, I mean, these people are human beings. You can say, "I really love your writing. You're a great writer. I enjoy the stuff that you write about, and you recently did a thing on this band, and we think we're kind of in that vein and would love for you to check us out." Sometimes it's just that little bit of human interaction that will really help win someone over.
Okay,
So,
awesome.
so let me get into distributing, servicing, effective follow-up, that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
Um, One thing right off the bat I want to say is please don't send email to media people after you've sent a press release asking if they have received the press release, because that is the quickest way to get on a media person's shit list. If you've done your job, they'll be clicking that link to hear the track or watch the video at the very least. And if you really want to see who's opening the PR and click on your links, thankfully in this day and age, you can use a mail distro program like the one we use. We use ymlp.com, your mailing list provider. I'm not specifically endorsing that one over others. I know there's MailChimp and a whole bunch of them, but we like that one because we can break our groups up very specifically. Anyways, when you use a program like that, you can actually look on the back end and see who's clicked on the PR, who's opened which link, and that is really, really, really helpful. Now, follow-up is important depending on what you've announced. So don't follow up just to say, hey, did you get my PR? Because most of the time you are never going to receive a reply just from sending out a reply, just from sending out a PR. It's the same with me. If I send out a PR on a new artist, I may get a couple of replies back out of a few hundred people that I service. If it's Lumineers or Dallas Green, I might get more because, of course, there's more interest for those artists. But it is our job to follow up with media if we expect any coverage with an unknown artist. So just know you keep your pitch short and sweet. You highlight a couple of talking points, do your best to find connections in the market you're pitching. So if you're playing in Edmonton and you were born in Edmonton, mention that. Say, I'm from Edmonton, Edmonton born artist. Even if you don't live there anymore, that's of interest. And then say, here's more info if you need it, and attach that PR that you sent out. Because you can't expect a media person to have a PR at their fingertips just because you emailed it to them 4 days ago. Never make that assumption that, oh, I sent you the PR, you should have it in your inbox. Don't do it. Just say, hey, following up, we sent out this PR, we're coming through town, and attach more information if they need it, but keep your initial pitch just to a few lines, because if that person opens that email and sees paragraphs, that's it. You've lost them. I know when I have to admit, and I have to pay more attention because I get a lot of requests for artists for various things like charities and stuff like that. And when I see an email come in and it's 5 paragraphs long, I just don't even want to go through it. You know what I mean? So anyways, let's see, what else did I want to get to?
Well, while you cue that up, I can tack on to your previous point. Again, a lot of this is preference, but I'll just tell you mine. As Cristina said, too long on the personal outreach is a no-no. On the other side, though, often your press release, if it is just a single formal release, the text, the headline, the text, the links are all going to be in the body of your email. Great. Having the release as a separate file, a PDF, or even an HTML direct link where you can send someone, also great. But please avoid the blank email with attached file, where it's really just giving someone an extra step to want to check out and see if it's something they're interested in, which, as Christina's unnamed writer who gets 75 pitches a day could probably tell you, doesn't really need extra steps to give someone the 1 in 70 shot at getting some ink. Anyway, just something to bear in mind from a somewhat jaded
Well, speaking of jaded, let me tell you what you should not include, or the no-nos. Now, we often get sent releases from other countries when we're working a non-Canadian artist, like the Lumineers. I'll get the Lumineers US PR person's draft, and then I will update it to make sense for our territory. In general, UK press releases they just have a tendency to overhype stuff all the time. I'm sure it's because it works for their market, but it does not work for our market. You just do not tell a media guy that this is the best music that they've ever heard. You never want to say something like that. As a rule, just stay away from hyperbole or language that's too superficial with too many flowery adjectives. And we also don't need every single detail about your band or the whole bio in the PR. As I mentioned, just pick the things that may stand out and what may set you apart. One journalist told me, 'cause I reached out to a couple of journalists that I really respect, and ask them their advice because they're the ones getting a million PRs a day. And he said, this particular journalist, keep the hype to a minimum. Don't exaggerate. Pet peeve is things like we've shared the stage with Foo Fighters when you were on a side stage at 1 p.m. at a huge multi-act festival that they headlined. Media guys see through that. So, I mean, you could say you played at that festival, but I guess, my point, that's my point, basically.
And it's a great one. And once again, I'll plug, if you go to nwcwebinars.com/archives, we've got a bio writing session in there where make that exact same point. That hype isn't really doing anyone a favor. We get it. We're in this game too. Well, Cristina nailed it. I just wanted to reinforce it from the opposite perspective. More questions coming in here. This is great. And actually, one of them on effective follow-up, if you don't mind me sticking this in before we jump to that last question.
Stick away, Andrew.
You mentioned like email distribution services, MailChimp, etc., which will tell you how many of the emails you'd sent out as part of your campaign were opened, how many weren't, your click-throughs, etc. Question here is, at what point, after resending a release to anyone that didn't open it, like how many tries would you recommend giving there before it might edge on annoying, maybe offensively so? And then she's also asked, which is quite a great question, is it wise then to maybe change up your headline and reshape it a bit for maybe one more try?
Okay, yeah, that's a really great question. Well, first, let me say again, you have to use some common sense here especially when you're a lesser known act and you're sending out press releases. I mean, to answer that question specifically, that's why we do more than one PR. I never send the same PR twice. Okay. I will use that PR, and Andrew, you've seen hundreds of PRs from me at this point. The first PR will announce something, and we'll still use most of the guts on the second PR to keep reiterating that message. But the first paragraph will change because it's something else we're bringing to their attention. So that's how we handle that. We don't resurface the same PR all the time because it just doesn't make any sense. You have to understand that you're planting seeds, and the key is you really need to have realistic expectations. Most people are not going to read your PR, and that's okay. You have to start, you have to send out a press release. Having said that, really quickly, I'll say, as far as common sense goes, don't send a PR out at 4 p.m. on a Friday. Don't ever do that. Don't send a PR out on a Friday afternoon if it's a long weekend. The people are checked out mentally. People are already away. Just keep that in mind when you're sending out a press release. Is there a holiday on Monday? What is it too late in the afternoon? We love to send PRs first thing in the morning by 10 a.m. Eastern. Mostly, if there's a premiere, sometimes we have to wait and send the PR, but I don't like to send it later than 1 p.m. in the afternoon Eastern time, generally speaking. I never really liked Friday PRs, but we're kind of painted into a corner now because releases drop on Fridays. Right. So we have the day of PR, which I used to hate, but I understand the value of, because that's when the links are live on DSPs, digital service providers. So you have to send a PR out that day. I get it.
Do you have a favorite day of the week? Sorry to interrupt. That just popped up here.
I like a Wednesday. I don't know. That's just subjective. Tuesday or Wednesday. Sure. Sometimes it really depends on what you're announcing. And also, on that note, I also like it when bands are announcing stuff themselves. Like Cancer Bats will announce their shows on their socials, which is fantastic because they've got a huge fan base. And then we'll follow suit with a press release to media. That's okay. You don't have to announce things in tandem with the promoter or with the band. It's actually great to have that little space between stuff. So I guess you have to lay the groundwork, and you just have to remember it's going to take time. It's going to take several press releases. It's going to take a couple of album cycles. Sometimes you're just inviting media folks to check out a show. So it's low pressure. You're not expecting anything from them. And that's kind of how you're planting seeds. And then over time, if your music is good and you have enough support, you've got some fan growth, interest is going to grow. You just have to follow up and have a lot of engaging assets, build your story every time you send something out. And there's really no other secret than that.
Okay.
And just to make this point too, in Canada, and you probably know this, Andrew, the majority of press, they don't feature an artist unless they're coming through market. So just because you have a record coming out or a single doesn't mean media are going to be interested in you. That's why the story is so important. If you have a tour, then that gives us an excuse to go into these markets like Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, because you're coming through town. So tour dates are really, really important, but that's just kind of a little side note on that. But I actually want to tell you a story.
Please.
We're working a talented young duo out of Toronto named Tandem. And they're out of the jazz program at York U, early 20s, really talented, and they're definitely in the planting seed stage. So they're building their live show, and they're doing a lot of footwork, and there's not a lot of newsworthy info we could really use with them. Except I found out that Maxine, the lead vocalist and guitarist, has 2 name drop worthy uncles. So when I was on the phone, just getting some background information, I find out that one of her uncles is Chile Gonzalez. If you don't know who he is, look him up. And the other is Christoph Beck, who is the award-winning composer behind Frozen and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which he won an Emmy for, by the way. So I was like, how is this not in your bio? This is such important information. So I weaved it in nicely with a line like, Maxine's undeniable musical talent runs in her family, or, family lineage. And it definitely made a difference in sort of the reaction from people. There's a couple of guys at CBC that wrote me and said, "Oh, that's super cool. I love Chile. This song is great." So just keep that in mind. Like sometimes you don't think of those things. You don't think something's newsworthy. I remember my husband's old band. The drummer just out of the blue one day said he was the drummer on Bob Hope's USO tour in the Middle East. And I was like, how did you not ever tell me that? That's such a cool thing to know. So something that you might not think is cool might actually be really cool. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Oh no, that's great. And funny enough, I was thinking the opposite, that like it might be something people are hesitant to include, not because they don't think it's cool, but maybe because they're afraid it's like gimmicky or something. But I'm with you that those are all cool stories, and something that just gives you another little anchor to kind of latch onto when you're on our side and trying to find like, where's the story here? How can I tell it? How can I flesh this out?
Right.
Those are great ideas.
Yeah.
Well then, yeah, I don't, if there's any more you wanted to add on follow-up, I figure it's a great time to hand it over. That, we're giving you this information to kind of get started on your own, you and your team. You got to start somewhere. But there it is. Like, at what point should someone be considering hiring a publicist? Do you have any? And again, I know it's a case-by-case kind of thing, but or maybe to flip it on you, like, what does an artist need to have in place that makes you think that you can help them out, like that would make you want to work with them and know that you could add value to their project?
Any good, honest indie publicist should probably be upfront and tell you that you may not be ready for a publicist. So I'll tell you that right now. If you are reaching out to publicists, to independent publicists to help you with your musical projects, and they promise you the world, just run the other way, because that's just not cool. We always set realistic expectations with new artists, especially artists that are not really well known. Again, it's planting seeds. It's going to take time. I was Arkel's first publicist, and it took a good few months before anyone was really interested in them. So it took a few PRs, it took a few pitches when they were going on tour, and then the band, of course, was killing it because their performances kept getting better. So you just have to be patient, and you you have to take that time and realize it's going to take time. But if you are a band or artist just starting out and you've only played a show or two, the short answer is you don't need a publicist. You really don't. There isn't much we can do for you at this stage that you can't do for yourself.
Mhm.
If you've been touring locally or regionally on a regular basis, you have a small fan base that's starting to develop and you're nurturing on your socials, you may want to explore hiring someone, even just for the fact that you want a press release or your music to get into the right hands. Um, and if you're a band or artist that tours nationally and you're about to release an album, a publicist is a really good idea. Um, so that's kind of there's no hard and fast rule. We just kind of know if there's an artist that is just really new and they have their first EP, obviously they want to get that out there, but it's probably good to do that on your own unless you have a grant, a factor grant, to help you with marketing and promotion, because you're going to be spending a lot of money out of pocket for maybe one or two reviews, if that. And you have to remember, you're not paying a publicist for results as much as you want results. You're paying a good publicist for their relationships, their contacts, their knowledge. And then, of course, you hope to get results out of that in the form of a review or, a mention or show coverage, that type of thing. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I do see a question, Andrew, about from Alexandra saying, if you're releasing your debut EP and you want to send out a PR for the first time prior to your first EP, is it okay to not have music available to listen to? No, don't do it. You need, in this day and age, there's no point in sending out a communication without something for that media person to listen to or to watch. You're just kind of wasting your time, I think.
I agree completely. Beat me to the punch, but yeah, great advice. I'd say the same thing. Need something to latch onto. Thank you, though, Alexandra. It is a great question. And actually, yeah, if you don't mind me jumping into one, Randy asked if editors like a PR with a short stock article they can add to. Yeah, which is exactly why Cristina was saying, like, you'll often cull from the artist bio, which I guess your bio should almost be like your ideal Rolling Stone article in a sense, in the ballpark of 500 to 600 words, telling your story, hitting every potentially interesting or captivating or compelling point about your project, about your music. So then if we consider that kind of the dream, that if your artist bio is published as a page in Spin or Rolling Stone or whatever, if that's really great, then yes, publicists can call from that to send out the PR. And then in either case, because they're both kind of working with the same copy, we editors or writers or whoever it is, yeah, exactly, kind of have a short stock article that we can add to, build off of. Like we said, in some cases, it's just going to be posted, which isn't ideal as a music fan, but then, you're getting your copy straight out there. Am I on point with that, Cristina?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Can I tell a little sheepdog story and then we can move on?
I would love that.
This is also like, when do you know you need to hire a publicist? So when the Sheepdogs became one of 16 finalists in a Rolling Stone magazine competition a few years ago, Ryan, the bass player, reached out to me. And this is where a little bit of strategy comes into play too. They were the only Canadian band in that contest. And the guys are originally from Saskatoon, for those who are familiar with the band.
Mhm.
And so I knew Saskatoon press were going to be stoked. I knew that we could get mainstream press in Saskatoon, because it's a smaller market, to potentially get behind the story. But how do I get the rest of Canada behind this band from Saskatoon? And so I really focused on making this a Canadian story. This was the one Canadian band in that Rolling Stone competition. And it could have you know, maybe not, just I could have fallen flat on my face and it not worked out, but it actually worked really well. So using that angle as the only Canadian band made it more interesting to outlets outside of Saskatoon. And then as they became, one of 8 and one of 4, we just kept building from there. And of course, being one of 4 and then ultimately winning the Rolling Stone magazine contest brought them a lot of press. It was actually insane how much stuff we had those guys do the first couple of days. So there's an example of also when to hire someone. They were smart to call me in to help them out, to help build that story. So anyway, there you go.
Huh. And there you go, two presser copycats. Like, I wonder if they were and also ran that year, how many folks would have been as hungry as they were to ride those coattails after they were on the cover. But anyway,
I'll tell you, that band was a band for about 7 years before that happened.
Yeah, there you go. And one that I'm guilty of not having known a peep about. I guess there's one more here in the queue. I should have flipped since we are in question period. I guess we'll pretend we're talking about a album or EP or single release. How far in advance do you start building that campaign? And then maybe the second part, like how far in advance, if say you've got a release coming up on blank day but have a single already out, like can you give us a bit of an idea as to effective timing to roll out a campaign?
It depends on the artist and how big they are. And I mean, if you have an artist that you have to consider internationally, different territories, there's a lot more things involved. So let's say it's a developing band, a young band. Then you need weeks in advance. I mean, before it was months, but I guess 3 to 4 months. We love having at least 3 months notice on a project. And you really want to send out a PR if you can, a few weeks ahead of a release. Again, if it's a bigger release, I mean, I'm trying to think of when I sent out the first PR with Dallas's, the first song off of his A Pill for Loneliness, the record that he recently put out.
You keep going and I'll find out.
Yeah, you do that for me. Thank you. But it was weeks and weeks ahead of the release date of October 4th. But if you're a younger band, I'd say give yourself a good 8 weeks if you can. The first PR, at least 8 weeks, where you're saying, hey, we've just released this song, our EP's coming out in 2 months. That would be my advice. I mean, sometimes things come out more. There's not as much lead time to deal with that. That happens all the time. I've found more and more, and I think it's because more people can independently put out records. We're getting a lot of email from younger bands. When I say younger, I mean artists that are not fully known yet, not necessarily age-wise. Saying, hey, we're going to drop our single next Friday and we want to put out a press release, and you're not giving us enough time to set things up. So that you have to keep that in mind too. So yeah, just give yourself a few weeks. You shouldn't rush anything out.
Bingo. City and Color announces new album, A Pill for Loneliness, out October 4th via Still Records. Debuts album opener, Living in Lightning. Watch video for hit single Strangers. That came mid-August, the 16th. So math is hard.
There you go. And I don't think that was the first one, because the first one was Astronaut. That was the first
I didn't even go back far enough.
Yeah. So there you go. Just for it, that was the first radio single, that PR. So I mean, if you have a lot of tour dates and you want to get them out there, and it's important to get them out there, put that out first, and then say, there's an EP coming, and then send something out when you have that song ready to share.
Awesome. And I guess just reinforcing what you said earlier too, that I guess even if you're announcing something ahead of time, you need something in there that someone can click on, hear, watch right away. So it kind of feels like a really effective long-term campaign is kind of like each release would sort of be linked to another, in a sense that you're saying album's coming out soon, here, check out the single. And then you might, album is out now, listen to it, right in time for a tour kind of thing. And just always sort of teeing something else up while giving an immediate gratification. Is there any water in there?
Sure, absolutely. There's also been times, Andrew, I mean, we did this with, I remember this distinctly because this is what I suggested to their manager at the time, Scenic Route to Alaska, really talented band that we work with.
Yeah.
They're all talented. I don't need to keep saying that, but so my approach was, because they were going to release something in the new year, whichever year that was, a few years ago. And my suggestion was to send out a note, just because we were so close to holidays. I sent out more of a personal note saying, hey, we're going to be working with this band. They're really great. Check them out. Here's a link to check them out. And you're going to hear more from them in the new year, yada, yada, yada. And then the first official press release didn't come out until the new year. But I actually got some great feedback on that personal note, just saying, oh, wow, these guys are really good. Look forward to hearing more from them type thing. So it doesn't have to be specifically a press release. It could be just some news, an update type thing. It depends on what you're trying to put out there.
Oh, awesome. Well, we'll cap it. We got to everybody's question. If something comes to you from any time from now, you can hit us up. Both of our emails are, easy to find. And actually, I was just going to give them to you now, but you're going to be chasing your media contacts emails. So maybe we'll let you just do a bit of minor digging to find Cristina and/or I, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thank you for joining us, and a huge thanks to Cristina especially. I appreciate it so much, and I'm really proud of what we were able to share with folks this evening. Thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I hope that some people take away some good stuff from this.
Well, Deborah says that was great. Thank you, Deborah, and I agree completely. On Christina's part, at least. You will, as it says right here, if you registered for the session, thank you. You'll get a follow-up email tomorrow with the link to the recording for this one. We have our November session that'll be teed up tomorrow, nwcwebinars.com. Head over, you can get registered. This one's called Make Money with Media Placements. Whether it's sync licensing in movies, TV, films, gaming, through to branded partnerships, branded playlists. David Heyman from Supergroup is joining us to talk about all of these opportunities in the ever-evolving music landscape. I knew you'd know him too.
David's great dude. Yeah, and having said that, you'd be surprised sometimes. Some outlets that you might not expect, they love playing new music because it is easier for them to get publishing clearances. So, for instance, I have a buddy, my buddy Amel, who's a producer with Sportsnet, 31 Thoughts Hockey Podcast, and another buddy Carson, who does a lot of stuff with Hockey Night in Canada. They come to me all the time, and they will play in bumpers a lot of the great developing artists we have, like, artists that are not as big, like a Mono Whales. So yeah, it's that. I'm gonna maybe sign up for that one too, Andrew. Listen to that one.
It would be a pleasure having you join us. And well, there you go. You've heard it here too. And I guess it just reinforces too, it's a small industry. Everybody talks, everybody knows each other. So treat everyone the way you would want to be treated.
Yes.
Good vibes are coming your way. nwcwebinars.com for that. Thank you again to Cristina. Listenharder.com. You can check out some examples of press releases there. Check out a few of their artists who, and I didn't say this in the session either, but you're working with a great publicist like Listen Harder, like Killbeat. There's a ton of them out there. Where on my end, I love that they only take on projects that they're passionate about, that they believe in, because like certain record labels too, I know if I'm getting a PR from some of these firms that right away that tells me that this artist is of a certain caliber and someone that's worth paying attention to. So keep that in mind when you start shopping around for someone to work with on the publicity front after you've taken all this advice and put it to use. We'll let everyone get back to their evening. Thank you again, Cristina, a ton, though I'm going to lose you when we close here. And thanks to everyone else for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.